Now, you've probably heard of the Halo Trust. It's the world's largest humanitarian mine clearance organisation, saving lives and restoring communities threatened by landmines and other weapons of war. It's now my great pleasure to welcome to the stage their Chief Executive and former British Army officer, Major General James Cowan.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to say a few words about development and defence and the connection with the two of the biggest donors to overseas aid, the United States and Britain. As you just heard, I used to be a soldier. My regiment was the Black Watch, a short name with a long history. In 1963, the pipes and drums of the Black Watch toured America, playing famous venues such as Madison Square Garden. Their last concert was on the lawn of the White House in the presence of President Kennedy. A week later, the president was dead, and Jackie Kennedy requested that the Black Watch lead the funeral procession, the only non-American military unit ever to have taken part in a US state occasion. Some months later, in an effort to secure British support in Southeast Asia, Lyndon Johnson, recalling the funeral, asked Harold Wilson for the Black Watch. Wilson refused, and Britain played no part in the Vietnam War. In 2004, after a similar request from Bush to Blair, the Black Watch deployed to Iraq, Triangle of Death. At 1300 hours, on the 5th of November 2004, a car driven by an unshaven man with pale features approached a Black Watch checkpoint south of Fallujah, held by the Pipes and Drums platoon. He drove at an unremarkable speed, was seen to smile, and then detonated a suicide IED. The blast killed Sergeant Stuart Gray, Private Scott McCardle, and Private Paul Lowe. 8 soldiers were wounded. In peace, these men were outstanding pipers and drummers. In war, they were soldiers. The blast ripped the heart out of that band. It's hard to play without your hearing, your fingers, or your limbs. In 2015, I left the Army to lead the Halo Trust, the world's biggest mine clearance organisation. Halo was founded by a Scottish soldier 30 years ago. We operate in 25 countries and employ 8,500 local people. These people would otherwise be destitute, displaced, or recruited by ISIS or the Taliban. Last year alone, 1.7 million people benefited from our work. Halo is an Anglo-American charity, meeting the humanitarian expectations of both countries, as well as our European and other global partners. Whatever you may have heard about cuts to aid, the truth is that the Trump administration has increased its spend on weapons removal to just over $300 million a year. So I'd like to acknowledge publicly that American support. This year, Halo's opened a program in Iraq. We're clearing improvised explosive devices, or IEDs, from around Fallujah, ironically, or perhaps appropriately, where I fought with the Black Watch in 2004. Unlike earlier wars fought largely in open country, the war in the Middle East has been focused on great cities like Fallujah, Ramadi, Aleppo, Mosul, and Raqqa, where booby traps proliferate and bombs lie buried in pancaked concrete buildings. Let me give you an idea of the scale of this problem. There are an estimated 8 million tons of conflict rubble in Mosul alone. That's 3 times the size of the Great Pyramid of Giza. I don't need to labour the point that further conflict in the Middle East could easily bring terror back to the streets of Britain. Halo's addressing the problem of urban explosive contamination through use of British technology adapted from that other mining sector, mineral extraction, using crushers, sifters, and diggers. Penny Mordaunt's announcement of the Hope in Conflict Fund, a tech challenge to organisations around the world, is an opportunity to find new solutions to our work for people like Halo. Iraq is our newest operation, but Afghanistan is Halo's longest-running programme. An Afghan has led Halo there since the early 1990s. Of its 3,700 deminers, only 5 are expatriate staff. A few years after my time in Iraq, I commanded Task Force Helmand. In place of that very British, very military, and very expensive solution in Helmand. HALO presents a very Afghan and very affordable answer to the problem. Britain and the US have been long-standing supporters of mine action in Afghanistan and indeed globally. Over 10 years, DFID has funded the clearance of Herat province, benefiting 370,000 families. In Afghanistan, our deminers could have swollen the ranks of the Taliban. Instead, they've been given the dignity of a livelihood. Outputs such as these should silence the most vocal of aid critics, for it shows that aid is not only the right thing to do, it's also an investment in our national interest. Recently, Afghanistan has been clouded by violence. Despite this, in February, I hosted a visit by Ruth Davidson to Kabul. Now, Ruth, as some of you may have heard, is no shrinking violet, and I've rarely seen a happier face than when I let her blow up a landmine. But there are plenty of other women in this sector, and HALO has also hosted Priti Patel in February 2017 in Afghanistan, and Penny Mordaunt at our southern headquarters in Salisbury a few days after the last Novichok incident. The 0.7% of GDP that the UK commits to overseas aid is often a subject of controversy. Should be more spent on domestic priorities, should more be spent on defence. There's only one great writer on war, Karl von Clausewitz. Now, Clausewitz, whose thesis centres on the trinity of people, army and state, he doesn't get much of a hearing in the aid world, I can tell you. Penny Mordaunt has described the 3 Ds of defence, diplomacy and development. This is the modern Clausewitzian trinity. As a mine clearance charity led by ex-soldiers, HALO sits at the junction of this trinity, now known in Whitehall as the fusion strategy. HALO is distinctive from other aid charities in that it's not simply giving aid to needy people, it's enabling people with training and leadership to help themselves. A good example of the fusion doctrine is the DFID-initiated new National Security Council strategy for Africa, which brings together aid and trade. NGOs and the military are sometimes wary of each other. Since we're both funded by the taxpayer, I don't think that's good enough. It's my belief that military support is required in countries where conflict still spills into the humanitarian space. In a world in which we face threats that are increasingly hybrid in nature, we surely need a fused response between military, agency, diplomatic, and non-governmental organizations. It would be easy to be overwhelmed by the scale of the reconstruction challenge in the Middle East. But it's worth remembering Mozambique. For 22 years, the United Kingdom supported mine clearance there, led by HALO. In 2015, Mozambique was declared mine-free. The UK recently committed £100 million to ridding the world of landmines. This took strategic vision, and I salute this government for making it possible. But if the UK helps consign landmines to the history books, what about the clearance of IEDs, bombs, rockets, small arms, and other ordnance from countries? Just as the US has done under successive administrations, I think it's time that the United Kingdom's aid budget was more focused on addressing these threats. So alongside the UK's Global Mine Action Programme, I'd like to see a global weapons reduction programme focused on countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, and Yemen. Such a fund might be available to NGOs such as HALO, employing ex-servicemen, or it might just as well be open to spare capacity in defence. I readily concede to having skin in this game, and my mind sometimes does return to that suicide IED in Iraq in 2004. But personal anecdote isn't a good enough reason to do something. There are 3 questions that should be answered. Is it in the national interest? Is there a humanitarian need? Can it be done? The short answer to all 3 is a resounding yes. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, James. And now we have a short video from the HALO Trust.
Angolans call this part of their country the land at the end of the earth, where the wind turns. Isolated, untouched, beautiful. But beneath the ground, lie hundreds of thousands of landmines. Angola's brutal 27-year civil war ended in 2002. But for the people of this region, the presence of landmines is a continuing source of fear and trauma. Since 1994, the Halo Trust, or Hazardous Areas Life Support Organization, has been clearing landmines in Angola. They've cleared over 93,000 landmines, opened up 5,600 kilometers of safe road access, and educated over 500,000 people about the risks of mines and how to avoid them.
We use international funding to train local people to become skilled enough in order to clear their own land.
Que na verdade as minas não só afetavam a população, mas também afetavam minha família, afetavam a mim mesmo.
But there is still work to do. There are at least another 500,000 landmines left in the ground. And to achieve the international goal of removing all landmines worldwide by 2025, the Halo Trust needs funding to increase their local demining staff.
We're the only people who can do this work at the scale we do it and as efficiently as we do it. There's still a job to do. It's not finished by a long shot.